Hey, what's up? This is Scott from Syntax. Now that we're on YouTube and approaching 800 episodes, we wanted to release some of the very best interviews that we've done on Syntax. So please enjoy one of our favorite episodes.
Welcome to Syntax, the podcast with the tastiest web development trees out there. Today we have a special guest on the podcast, Mr. Brad Frost. Brad is author of Atomic Design, design system consultant, web developer, CSS thought leader. I'm sure he doesn't like that last one. All kinds of stuff around building design systems and building stuff for the web. Welcome, Brad. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
And if you want to see all of the errors in your application, you'll want to check out Sentry at sentry.io/syntax. You don't want a production application out there that, well, you have no visibility into in case something is blowing up and you might not even know it. So head on over to sentry.io/syntax. Again, we've been using this tool for a long time and it totally rules. All right, Wes.
Let's start I'm sure that literally everybody has probably stumbled upon your website at some point. If you just go to Brad's website, you probably go, oh yeah, I remember this website. But if people don't know who you are, give us a rundown of who you are, where you're from, what you do, all that good stuff.
Yeah. My website being a sort of a calling card is a point of pride. That one time I was at the dog park and was talking with somebody and so, got into, oh, what do you do? And, oh, I'm a web designer, and started talking about what they got into. And then they said, well, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm a web designer too. And started explaining a little bit more. And he goes, you're the guy with the orange website? And I was like, yes, I am.
Hey.
I am the guy with the orange website. So
Is it orange? I was going to say, I almost introduced you as the guy with the brown website.
It's like cream, brown, and orange. Those are like my sort of like, I have like a long-standing brand palette that has worked quite well for me over the years.
How did you develop that brand palette? Is that like just like your favorite colors, or was it
my vibe is whole like 1970s. Like I was like born in the wrong era. Like yeah.
Oh yeah, I can see it now.
Yeah.
Well, besides having a brown website, what else do you do? what do you put on this brown website?
What do I put on this brown one? Yeah. So I do, like you said, I do a lot around design systems. And I've been blogging about the web, making websites since 2007. And so I've been sort of on a few different rodeos. I kind of started maybe coming into prominence a little bit through the whole responsive era. I happened to be working at an agency right whenever the sort of smartphone bomb went off, and it was like, okay, what do we do with this? And so I kind of started piecing that together, and sort of through that responsive design work is what sort of ultimately kind of evolved into working with design systems. Because in a lot of cases, what we learned is, oh yeah, it's not that making a whole page responsive is the hard part. It's no. How do we convert this navigation thing to, something that's more conducive for small screens, large screens, and everything in between. But anyway, so kind of came up through the agency world, but for the last decade, I've been on my own, but also partnered, and I am a principal and design system consultant with an agency called Big Medium, with my partner Josh Clark, my brother Ian, and a whole other sort of cast of characters. And what we do is we sort of jump into a bunch of big organizations working with design and development teams to actually help sort of implement and evolve design systems and stuff. So that gets into all the technical architecture side of things, which is what I tend to sort of hang out and do. And my team sort of helps, build component libraries and integrate component libraries into products and sort of make it all go. But then it also, of course, gets into all of the people and the process and the culture and the organizational kind of stuff. And that's that's the real fun and the real challenge of doing design system stuff. Like anybody can make a button, right? Anybody listening
Yeah.
to this, that's not the hard part about
Yeah.
design systems. So that's what I've spent the last decade doing, and sort of through that work, sort of helping organizations build these things. Sort of came up with this methodology called atomic design that sort of helps connect the design systems that we're creating to the real products that those design systems are serving, and sort of kind of setting up this kind of virtuous cycle between, if your marketing website has big old heroes and chunky cards and newsletter sign up things, well, guess what your design system needs to account for, right? It needs to account for exactly those things. So it's been a fun journey, and the fun part about doing consulting and plugging, ducking my head into all of these different organizations is that we get to see many, many, many different flavors of the same thing, right? Sort of different patterns or different sort of weird left turns or different frustrations that all ultimately sort of feeds what I talk about and write about and think about.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm based in Pittsburgh, but internet.
Oh yeah, right on. Let's take it that direction about design systems. So we'll talk about both like holistically, like because I know that like a design system takes both a lot of work, both in terms of planning and figuring out how to approach something, but also from like a technical implementation as well. Like how do you do that? How do you make a button look the same across a 20,000 developer organization? So you want to give us like a rundown of, like, first of all, people listening might not even know what is a design system, and then we'll go into maybe some of the tech behind it.
Yeah, no, it's a great place to start, because that's kind of the $1 million question. And if you were to ask a bunch of people who work in our world to define what a design system is, you're going to get a lot of different answers. It's a bit of like the parable of the blind men and the elephant, right? Where blind men approach the elephant and somebody's touching the trunk and they're like, oh, it's like a snake. And somebody's touching the leg, it's like, oh, it's like a tree trunk.
Yeah.
And it's like, so there's all these different sort of facets and assets to a design system. But sort of the umbrella that I tend to put things under is that a design system is the official story of how an organization designs and builds user interfaces. And that's kind of intentionally vague, right? There's a lot of ingredients that go into that story, but at the same time, like that's kind of ultimately what you're trying to do is say, here is how we wield accordions or form fields. Here's the things that we care about. Here's how we sort of construct and architect and build and implement user interfaces. And it's sort of specifically user interfaces, not necessarily digital products, because there's all these other things that go into making a digital product work, as you know, that don't pertain to user interfaces. So I kind of sort of narrow the focus to that. There's kind of three main assets, three legs of the stool from what a design system sort of constituent parts are. And it's a design library and something increasingly Figma, right? Figma library containing your common components. And this is important here. Common components that are meant to work across an entire organization, not one product necessarily, right? A lot of times we're working with organizations that have dozens, hundreds, thousands of different websites and apps that are in there. So the design system is really the foundational level, which is like, here's where truly shared things go. And that's an important sort of qualifying characteristic of this, because there's lots of other things that can exist in like a layer cake format that we could talk about in a bit that aren't truly sort of scalable to the whole org. Yeah. So design library, one leg of the stool, a code library that is a corollary to the design library, and then kind of a reference website, some documentation that sort of brings it all together, right? So something like material.io or polaris.shopify.com or carbondesignsystem.com, right? There's just kind of brings it all together, puts a bow on it, helps sort of frame it, contextualize it, and sort of teach people how to use it properly. So those are the kind of like three core assets of a design system. And on the code end specifically, increasingly for the last like 4 going on 5 years now, we have been increasingly reaching for web components to help author and deliver design systems to the, again, dozens, hundreds, or thousands of applications, many, many, many different tech stacks, many different implementations, many different frameworks, many different CMSs, many different blah. But at the end of the day, when you talk about what a design system is, it's like delivering the kind of like dumb presentation, basic functionality of these sort of reusable components, right? The button, you pull in the button web component, boom, there you go. There's your branded buttons. Pull in the design system's accordion component. You click on it, guess what happens? It opens, right? You click on it again, guess what happens? It closes. So it's like, it's that level that we're talking about with design systems. We're not talking about wiring this up to sort of, back-end services or APIs or anything like that. It's kind of strictly the sort of presentation, the thing that the users see. I kind of call that the front of the front end code, right? HTML, CSS, presentational JavaScript. No logic, no nothing, just strictly that. And that concept alone, whenever we introduce that to our clients' organizations, or like it will help them sort of unpack that. It's not something that a lot of people outside of our little circles, I think, really understand.
Nice. You mentioned like it is a part of the different layers, being a design component and a code component to these layers. But I think one of the things that people hit is keeping some of that stuff in sync. Do you think that there, like, one is there a more unified way to connect the design and the code aspects, and is that even like a good idea to have those like deeply connected?
It's a damn good question. And yeah, like we've seen, generations now of trying to solve this problem, going all the way back to, Dreamweaver days, right?
Yeah.
And, WYSIWYG days and stuff like this. And, PSD to HTML just like hit the, probably like giving shivers to some people listening. But it's like, these tools are getting closer together. At the end of the day, they are different worlds, right? Like Figma, here's this blank canvas. You could just drag things around arbitrarily. You could have these different art boards, one for mobile, one for desktop and whatever. And you could just go, oh yeah, I'm just feel like moving that from here to here in free space, which is obviously not how things work in the browser. So it's challenging because, especially in like the Figma world, it's like gotten good. It's gotten a lot better at sort of and closer to representing the box model, basic things like, auto layout and sort of stretching things like to better behave like the browser. But at the same time, like it isn't, it's this kind of like very narrow band of what goes into UI, as you all know, right? There's many, many, many different capabilities that these browsers can do that do not get reflected in these static design tools. And there are prototyping tools and there's stuff like that, but those are all approximations, right? So you don't get performance, page layout and jankiness, right? Loading of like these big hero images, like all of that stuff, true interactivity and stuff like that. That's the user experience, right? Like that is the UI. And so, it's long been a soapbox of mine of like the whole sort of designer developer workflow and how broken it tends to be, especially whenever sort of things originate in design and then get thrown over the fence to development. So what's interesting in the world of design systems is that there's an opportunity to kind of reframe it. And this is what we help our clients do, is that what's in a design system Figma library isn't so much like a spec for developers to like build it out. What this Figma library is kind of a promise of what's in code, right? It is a representation of what exists in the coded design system, which means that downstream product designers are able to sort of reach for these things, drag their form controls onto a page, drag their button group onto a
Mhm.
page, drag their different cards onto a page, and know with a greater degree of certainty that oh yeah, this can be built, right? So it's a little bit different than the
Hmm.
normal design process where it's like I'm gonna blue sky, create this new funky homepage and then sort of give it to my developers to build out. It's a little bit the coded design system library truly is the source of truth, and then the Figma library is this kind of abstraction of that allows designers to do their thing.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm curious about like what does it actually look like when you put it in a developer's hand? So you said like web components, but like I'm
Hmm.
imagining a big company, their main app's built in React,
Hmm.
and they've got a marketing site in WordPress and a store running on Shopify.
Yeah.
How do you get like let's say you have a card, and
Yes.
that card has an avatar inside of it and a button and some text. How do you get that to look the same across all
Yes.
of the different websites?
Yeah. So we actually I just published 5,500 words, I think is what it ended up being, but it's kind of in the answer to that question, which is like here literally is the entire ecosystem of like the different layers of this layer cake and how you get these sort of web components that live at the sort of basement layer in the design system ultimately into products, right? And a lot of these, the answer to your question is really like, of course, like most things, web design and development is like, it depends. But
Mhm.
some of the ways that we accomplish this, if you have a card with an avatar, what else was in it?
A button and some text.
Yeah. All right. Card, avatar, button, text. What we tend to call that is a recipe that might not live in the sort of basement level design system. It's composed of all of those basement level design system things, right? But
Yeah.
this is where things get tricky because like whenever you deliver something that's that composed in your design system, product one might be able to use that thing as is. Product two comes along and they say, oh, we actually need two avatars or we need a button group instead of just this one
Yeah.
button or we
Yeah.
need a subheading in addition to that. And that's where those kind of more composable components like cards and headers and stuff like that tend to fall down. So what we do to solve that is we'll kind of like move that into its own layer called a recipe layer that allows people to go, okay, avatar card is its own product specific thing. And that thing might be a React component, right? Like if it is for like the flagship React
Yeah.
app, like
Okay.
you're saying. So it's like it would import what it would look like. It would be like import card, avatar, heading, text passage, or whatever you want to call that thing,
Yeah.
and button from the design systems web component library. But then a sort of React recipe gets born out of that, and then it gets ingested, by the actual application, however it sees fit. Alternatively, you could make those as its own sort of recipe layer, which is often like a sibling repo in like a mono repo or something like that, right? And make that in web components. And then you could deliver that to your React application, but also your WordPress site. And also, I don't know about Shopify and what their ability to digest or ingest packages and stuff like that is.
I'm curious, and like, what about all the CSS that comes with that? Is that CSS baked into that web component, so it's scoped to it, or do you give them a CSS file, or do they have to import it?
Yeah. So when you publish the design systems package, what you'll get in like a dist folder is like the CSS that is like effectively just a handful of CSS custom properties, right? That is what's sort of flowing through the web components to give it the specific look and feel. And what that does is that unlocks all the stuff with like, themable design systems and supporting multiple brands and white labeling and dark mode and the whole 9 yards, right? But that's the stuff that penetrates through the shadow DOM. So what it looks like in practice, if you just have like index.html, you're linking up the design system's CSS file in the head of your document. You're linking up via CDN or some package manager, the actual web component library. And then whenever in your body, then you're able to be like, DS dash, right? Design system dash button variant equals primary. And then right? That gets you the desired like look and feel. So that's like it at its like most basic in like an index.html thing. But then of course, every product, every app is architected differently, but ultimately, we're like leaning on NPM or Yarn or whatever to, pull these things in as dependencies, and then you're able to import them.
And then all of these web components are rendering out to standard HTML elements. So like there's no sweat if a React developer wants to put custom attributes or props or classes or anything on each of those.
Yeah, so this is what gets interesting. So there's like a couple concepts that are important, right? So one is the shadow DOM, right? So it's like you kind of have this kind of protected boundary around each one of these things. They're designed to be their own islands, which there's kind of pros and cons to all of that. There's some challenges around there, especially around like it's like if you have like a label web component and then a text input component, web component, and you need those things to talk to each other. That's all been kind of like either in progress or it has been sorted out at the sort of browser level. So it's getting better, but the last number of years has been fun to kind of be sort of hitting up against those kind of rougher edges. But things have definitely like stabilized a lot. But ultimately, like these things are their own little islands. They operate in a lot of ways similar to how a React developer would be used to sort of interacting with any other React component, but different in other ways, especially this kind of like, this literally has like a boundary drawn around it and you can't just go around and like extend it and just kind of reach into the shadow DOM and just kind of hack the crap out of things. So there's a number of interesting things that we tend to do. A lot of organizations that we work with have existing React applications and React component libraries to power those applications, or they have a bunch of Angular apps and an Angular component library that is sort of powering that. And a lot of times, like what we'll do is we'll actually kind of come in, almost like hollow out the guts of those things and establish this sort of more basement level web component layer, but still preserve those like React libraries and those Angular libraries. But all it is effectively like a pass-through layer. So React developers are still able to engage and interact with these React components, but under the hood, they're ultimately, being powered by web components. Same deal with the Angular world, right? Angular developers can continue using that stuff. So like the ergonomics are there for people used to working in certain frameworks. It also helps to sort of like normalize API stuff. Like one of the main things that we tend to encounter when we work with clients is from component to component, right? The button component was created first and uses specific language, and then people get lazy or junior developer kind of came in and created a new component, and it's like totally a mess from a language perspective. So a lot of the times what we do is help establish clear API definitions and a whole language around your component library. But then the cool thing with this kind of like intermediary layer with like a React layer or Angular layer or whatever layer is that you're able to sort of like have it be this pass through, but also kind of support the old API while also introducing the new API and sort of like smoothing that out under the hood. So there's like a lot of weird nuance here. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's like what's going on at the end of the day, if you zoom like way out, is like basement level web components getting delivered somehow, some way to real websites and apps that people use.
Yeah.
There might be a couple train stops along the way, or they might get sort of wrapped in sort of various levels of smarts or framework specific technologies, or this recipe layer like we're talking about. All of that is optional.
Yeah.
All of that like helps make it all go more sanely. But at the end of the day, we're talking about web components powering products now.
I think people listening right now might be saying, like, what's the benefit of going all in on web components for everything instead of just delivering some classes and telling people, hey, put this class on your button and it'll look like X, Y, and Z.
Oh God. Yeah. I wish I had like literally all of my clients with me. Like, just like, let me get Neil in here to tell you why that's ultimately, here's the problem. The problem with that is that's you can create, and this goes all the way back to just like Bootstrap, right? Like put bootstrap.min.css in the head of your document, match these classes, you're good to go, right? A lot of these things then require the DOM to be a certain way, right? In order for them to work, right? Like obviously we try to make classes as modular as possible and stuff like that. But a lot of times it's like, this stuff just falls down. That just introduces so much room for error. And especially whenever you're talking about, let's just say you got a bunch of React apps, you got a bunch of Angular apps, and you got a bunch of Vue apps. You're then requiring 3 different teams to rebuild the same accordion logic, right? Again, you click on the thing, it opens, you click on the thing, it closes. You're relying on 3 different teams to do that. Get the DOM exactly right. If something changes, that creates a bunch of downstream work for all of these sort of framework specific layers. And what we've learned, unfortunately, is that front end code is still kind of relegated to a second class citizen. Not a lot of people know how to do it properly. So by actually, the beauty of web components is that it literally bundles up the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript as a little nugget, as a little bundle that you just sort of get for free. And if changes happen, well, you bump the version, you pull in the latest version. Those people maintaining those Vue and Angular and React libraries don't need to do any work aside from just bumping the version, and they get whatever accessibility updates for free.
I was going to say that.
Oh, whoops, we changed these things in the DOM. Like, it's just way more direct of a delivery kind of vehicle for front end
that's
code.
beautiful. That's very well put. And I was going to say, not to mention like trusting 3 teams to accessibly implement the same thing exactly the same way, or sometimes like
it's awful.
Can't imagine that.
Wes, I've told you about this before. When I worked at Ford, we were given the task of building these experimental components, and we were expected to deliver them as a style guide. And our style guide was just being presented as, here's our Angular and CSS code. And Ford, with their 90 different markets, all used a different backend, a different CMS, whatever they had. Their front-end engineers were tasked with re-implementing those same components on every single one of those 90 CMSs. You could just see exactly where the problem is going to be there. And it was a tremendous nightmare, and most of it never ended up shipping because of that. Yeah. Do you think that these kind of problems are only the types of problems that people hit at a larger scale? Like, does Joe Schmo with a startup web app need to worry about having a system like this?
My answer is yes. Like, obviously the benefits become greater. I think the bigger the breadth and depth of the organization, like, which is why all of these, Fortune 500 companies and stuff it's like, obviously we need a design system because we've got dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of apps around. But let's just take index.html and about.html. And we need that header, we need that footer, we're going to have like the same kind of stuff on here. So, historically, whether that's with PHP includes or whatever sort of templating language or whatever, it's like that problem, like the problem of components, right, is needed as soon as you create 2 web pages. So the example I like to use is that like even my wife ran a jewelry company. I, of course, being the good husband I am, created a website for her. And even with what's effectively a 5-pager, right, I still applied this exact same methodology that we do for these jumbo size organizations, because in order to build the homepage, well, I need the hero, I need those cards, I need the header and the footer. And then I go into the interior page and it's like, oh, okay, well, I got my header and my footer, so that's already like 70% of the way done, right? And then I might be able to reuse that card there. And then by the time I get to the 3rd template, it's like, oh, okay. So now I'm really 70% of the way done. The 4th template, I'm like 85% of the way done. By the 5th template, I might not have to do any new component work, right? It's just a matter of composition. So just simply a matter of pragmatism. Like literally any organization of any size or any website or app or whatever can benefit from component-driven workflows. You could call that a design system. Again, like you don't need to make something that's as like full-blown as material design. I don't think that every organization needs something that sort of formal or grandiose or comprehensive. But even for like a design system to power a 5-page website, yeah, that's a design system powering the product as much as it needs to. And that's like a big asterisk that I wrote in that, in this big ecosystem article that we just published, is like, these are all potential things, right? Everything that we've just been talking about, this like framework specific layer, or this notion of recipes, or this notion of like even kind of taking our dumb form fields and wrapping them in whatever React hook forms, whatever, in order to make it go. Like all of those are optional, right? Like not every organization needs that. We've never encountered any organization that has like literally all of these layers in place. It's like a design system ought to be as complex as it needs to be and no more, right? Like don't introduce complexity without a real need for it. And like most things, you got to sort of start simple and then sort of grow and introduce that complexity only when it's warranted.
I had a question about design tokens, given that they're in this post. We'll make sure that this post is linked up, by the way, because it's really substantial and great. How do design tokens come into play here? And I think a common like understanding of them is that they're a design token is a CSS variable. Is, in your opinion, is that accurate at all? And like, what are design tokens here?
Yeah. So it's basically, there's truth to it. Just again, just with the term design system, it means different things to different people. What we've been talking about is like a web component powered design system. And through that lens, your design tokens are ultimately coming out the other end as CSS custom properties to power those web components, right? To sort of give the flavor. But they're effectively these like really low level brand attributes, right? They're brand definitions. Here's a brand orange, here's a brand cream, here's a brand brown, right? for my own personal website. There we go. So that's my brand palette, right? But so what these things do in design land is obviously you're able to sort of like pump those into your Figma library and stuff like that. In code, you're applying them as CSS custom properties, but also other environments, especially like native environments, for instance, right? So like iOS apps, Android apps, these things aren't using web components, but they can consume the design tokens and get Starbucks Green. If Starbucks Green needs to be Starbucks Green, whether you're on their Android app, their iOS app, their Starbucks.com, or even freaking like PowerPoint templates and stuff like that, which is pretty interesting. You could basically export these things. Like at its core, design tokens are like, here's the single place you define where Starbucks Green, what it is. And then there can be a second layer to this, what we kind of call like a semantic layer, like this kind of like tier 2 thing, that we sort of take this kind of dumb definition, this interface agnostic definition of what this Starbucks screen is. And then we can start mapping this as like a little sort of mix and match kind of exercise where it's like, oh, okay, brand background, we're going to map Starbucks green to that. Error success border, right? If we wanted to have Starbucks branded valid, form controls, for instance, right? We could sort of mix and match, right? Draw an arrow from that sort of tier 1 definition. So it's just like basically like mixing and matching these variables together and just sort of creating this kind of tiered system. And what doing that accomplishes is you could have, and literally all of our work over the last probably 5 years has involved some form of supporting multiple brands, supporting multiple product families. Things like our marketing website has a different type scale than our dashboard backend systems that don't need big jumbo things, right? So there's that use case. There's dark mode, light mode, and all of that stuff, which is its own thing. There's white labeling, which is we need to take our thing and then we have a bunch of people buying our software and then they need to be able to sort of skin it as Megabank Corp's, sort of brand colors and stuff like that. So all to say, by sort of having this design token layer that's kind of managed as its own thing, you're able to sort of like keep those definitions kind of like nice and tidy without necessarily touching the components at all, right? They like move at independent tracks. They could be independently versioned. So you get, and what we do is we train our clients like, here's the brand people, here's the marketing department. We like say, here's the mix and match exercise. You all do this and create your theme. We'll be over here working on making the accordion work, right? Like these are kind of two separate concerns. They're two separate layers. But yeah, so that was a little meandering of an answer, but like it's design tokens are these sort of brand definitions, right? They define the border radius, the colors, the font families, the type scale, all of that stuff, everything that goes into like an aesthetic, like look and feel. And then we pump the result of that into our web components and our Figma libraries in order to give them the specific aesthetic.
Wow. What kind of pushback do you get from people when you're trying to implement this? I'm sure that you've come across all kinds of folks being like, this is garbage, this is a bad way to do it. And people are probably listening to this being like, I want to implement this at our company. Like what's the most common type of pushback you get from people?
Oh man. I mean, there's so many. I mean, I think that there's, we'll say the biggest real challenge, I think at this stage in the game is design systems as a concept is, I don't want to say universally understood as a good thing. It's this one of these things that it's like, oh, that's a good idea in theory. Yeah. And I think that like where a lot of the sort of hesitation comes from is from people going, especially on the code side, which is where I live, which is like, wait, you're going to be delivering, you're touching my code. Yeah. You're touching my code base. Like, like, no. Like we need to own literally all of this. So a lot of times, like we deal with a lot of IT organizations that are super protective or have like very specific ideas around like how they want to sort of build their things. They're using very specific frameworks or very specific tech stacks. And they are often very hesitant skeptical, if not downright hostile to the idea of like some jokers coming in and saying, hey, yeah, we're going to create this thing and all you need to do is plug this in. So there tends to be a lot of like mistrust around that. And that's one of the things that we really tend to do, is really kind of come in, try to build that trust, and also just kind of be like way early on in the engagement. We're like, we don't know what the design system is going to like look like just yet, if one doesn't exist, but like, here's a bright pink button. Let's just pretend that is our design system. Let's at least get that pipeline set up so that we can like at least sort of get this into your world. You're able to kick the tires. You're able to sort of like validate or put it through the ringer. Like we're not precious here. We're not like here to, this isn't our egos. We just think that these are like good ideas. And so a lot of it is just kind of like getting this kind of division of labor introduced to organizations who are historically used to owning literally back to what you were saying earlier, like, oh yeah, you publish a CSS file, I match that. Like that's what a lot of teams are like comfortable with. But now we're like, wait a minute, like you're actually delivering more than that, and I don't know how I feel about that. So that's definitely on the tech side. That tends to be one of the common things that we encounter. And then of course, just like your garden variety, just designers wanting to be creative and like design systems are ultimately constraints, right? You're basically saying we do it like this, which means that we don't do it like these other ways, right? And if you really like purple and the brand's color is blue, like, don't know what to tell you, boss.
Yeah. That was the question I have, is like, what do you do? Like we're working on the Syntax website right now, and I wanted to style something that wasn't one of the blessed purples. I just went at it, Yeah. And like in a bigger, sorry,
did?
Scott.
I didn't hear. This is the first time I'm hearing about this.
Flipped over a table.
But
oh man, I even gave you copy and paste buttons for all the colors, man.
Sometimes it just doesn't look good. Like what do you do when it just doesn't look good?
Yeah. So the short answer is have a conversation. I could share this. I could share this article with. I could share this article with you, but we talk a lot about the governance process. We help organizations establish and evolve their governance processes for all of this. But like when push comes to shove, right? Like the happy path is designers and developers come to the design system to help them build new work, right? They reach for the component. They go to the design system component library and say, I need an accordion. There's the accordion. Does it do what I need that accordion to do? Does it open and close?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Good, happy path. That's like the success story. But if they come to the design system library and they don't see the component they need, or they don't see the variant, or they have a specific use case for it, or they just straight up don't like what they see, what happens? And coming back to the short answer is a conversation is warranted between the team or the person needing or wanting or having a need for something or has a question about something, and the design system team, who is ultimately the one sort of governing this. If it's just broken, if that purple isn't the right purple, then you all need to collectively make a decision. It's like, should the purple be updated?
Yeah.
Right? If it's a bad idea here, if it's not working in this context, well, maybe it's not working in these other contexts too. Or do we need to support multiple things? Or do we just kind of like, does the design system totally relinquish control of that layer? And this all really kind of depends on like the makeup, the smarts, the autonomy of the organization. Like, do you have a bunch of really smart product teams who are capable of making the right decisions versus you have a bunch of teams that can't be trusted with a butter knife in their hands?
Yeah, that's true. Like, even if you come back to the example I have, it wasn't the purple straight up, but I was using the purple in a gradient and fading it between purple and whatever it didn't look good. So I had to adjust it. And the answer there is not that we need to add a new purple, is that we need to figure out maybe we need a set of gradients that are reusable and look a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's what I'd recommend is like having gradients be part of your token set.
That's actually a good idea. Yeah.
Unless you really are just going for like a total mix and match, like almost like user generated like gradient thing. Like what we tend to do with our clients is it's like, here's this sanction set that all work. They work from a accessibility standpoint. They work from just like a vibe standpoint, and then you ship those.
Yeah, this is perfect timing because Wes and I were just supposed to have a conversation after this about finishing up everything. So if we can establish our system gradients now as part of this, would be great for me. I had a question about naming things. You'll often hear that like naming is a huge problem. And so far in this episode, I've heard you reference like a ton of different like token names for different things. Is like naming a massive part of this job? And is it hard? Is it something that you really love, or is it something that you have a system for?
There's a lot there. It's hard. Absolutely critical, incredibly hard. Yes, I do love it. Most people don't love it.
Yeah.
And it really kind of, I think this is the kind of systems mentality is that you need to kind of be this like weird, pedantic nerd about really small things. And having people that sweat that level of detail, like is really important because that means that everyone else just gets to sort of reap the rewards of that and they don't have to think about it, right? That's I think design systems and design system teams are like the great place for those kinds of people that just like sweat those really minute details over something, right? Like, do you call something small? SMALL.
Oh, gosh.
Are you writing that in all lowercase? Are you doing SM as like an abbreviated thing? Do you do SM, MD, LG, XL, right? Like, do you do that versus spelling it all out? Do you do camel case? Do you do, like all of that stuff? Like, that's the place for those kinds of conversations to happen. And ultimately, what we've found is that, again, people want just a good experience, right? When we talk about a good developer experience, it's like, oh yeah, we've internalized this API language that's used across the entire component library. So I know to use the term variant consistently, whether I'm reaching for a badge, whether I'm reaching for an alert, whether I'm reaching for a button, they all use this word the same way. And that's the hard work. And that's like, dare I say, like one of our team's like biggest pieces of intellectual property is like the specific language that we tend to recommend for our clients, because it's like people, my brother who is normally sitting next to me, we will have hours-long arguments over the specific names of a prompt, effectively.
Yeah.
But in doing that, we are sort of ultimately creating a better user experience for like everyone that's like downstream from it. One of the kind of coming back to kind of Figma land, what's interesting is that these tools are relatively new into the game of like API naming and stuff like that. Designers are used to like layer 73, copy 42.
Totally.
And like all of a sudden we're like asking them to sort of be like incredibly detailed and nuanced in the architecture of these components. And that's what, back to that kind of broken designer to developer handoff thing. This isn't just about here's what this component looks like. You're now sort of creating this architecture, you're creating this naming. So one of our biggest pieces of advice is to really like kind of have the designers and developers kind of co-located, really just working through the details of that API language together and sweating the small stuff, documenting the hell out of it, getting it out there, and making that like a part of your ongoing like governance and PR process to make sure that like any contributions or evolutions or new components or new props or variants, they come in, they're all using language in the same way. So incredibly difficult work. And it kind of comes down to like the choosing the right language, but it's also just like the governance and the managing the people part of it.
Yeah, and I know we're short on time here, but I do want to just a quick follow up there. What is the best way, in your mind, to document that language? Not like necessarily like the established, well, not necessarily like the component language, but like
Yeah.
those decisions that you've made. How do you present that to the team and keep it into a source of truth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I talked about that like third leg of the stool being the reference website. That's like a good
Yeah,
place
okay.
for
Mhm.
that kind of language. But also what we tend to do is have kind of a handful of markdown documents living in our code base that then gets sort of surfaced in Storybook. And then you can kind of like actually embed
Cool.
Storybook inside of your reference website tools. That tends to work out pretty well, and we're actually now doing some cool stuff where we're training AI on our sort of specific code guidelines and structure for design system architecture, and we're able to
Cool.
sort of like have AI sort of blast out new components that use the exact language that we're using and stuff like that. It's really cool.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. There's
That's
fun
wicked.
stuff.
Man, I don't even think we got like 30% of the way through my notes here. And Scott and I don't even have a lot
I
of
know.
notes before people come on. So that's saying something.
And I said I wasn't going to ask anything, and then I ended up asking a lot.
Just
'Cause
selfish.
I just couldn't help myself.
I wanted to ask about how
Sorry.
you blog so much, but I don't think we have time. We'll have to have you back on at some
Yeah.
point, but we'll move into the last section of the show here, which is our supper club questions. Curious which computer mouse and keyboard you're using.
Your standard issue Mac keyboard, Logitech MX Master 3
Beautiful.
guy, and just a MacBook Air.
MacBook Air.
Nice.
Beautiful.
I have some special questions for you. Do you do like any systems, like reading about systems design? I'm sure you do, but if you do, like what are some resources that you would recommend for that type of thinking?
Thinking in Systems is right there in your question, by Danella Meadows. That's like, it's beautiful because it just like gets into just systems in kind of in the abstract, but with like a lot of real world examples, but getting into things like economies and stuff like that. But it's so beautifully articulated that it like applies to really like low level stuff, like we're talking about like a design token system. It's like the same sort of concepts apply to these like massive things. So it's like the word design system, right? Like that word is important. It's not just like hot air. It's like this is this like interconnected kind of hierarchy. This is it all sort of influences one another. There's like feedback loops. There's all this good stuff. So yeah, it's a great book. I would recommend that book to literally anyone, whether or not you're doing this stuff. It really helped me better understand how the world works.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Another question I have. This is not on our regular supper club questions, but I'm curious what CSS features that are like either new or upcoming. There's a lot going on in CSS world right now. Which ones are you specifically excited about?
Pertaining to design systems, I think that container queries, it's you don't get much more like hand in glove than that, right? The idea of like being able to create a bunch of components in the abstract that just kind of like are their own little worlds, and then you're able to plug them into any arbitrary page layout or grid system or whatever, and they'll just work. It's like, that's massive. I mean, like that's absolutely huge. And Miriam Suzanne and like it's just hearing one of her talks and stuff at a conference we were speaking at. It's like it's the like style queries and like there's just like so much. But I'd say that was like that was the huge one, that whenever that sort of went over the theoretical line into like, this is actually happening. That was so big, but also just, man, like so many, the nesting stuff, really all like the stuff that you would want SAS to do, anytime that sort of native CSS chipping away at SAS's feature set, it makes me feel good. Like, because we're like getting to a point, and obviously I'm like enthusiastic about like web components and stuff, where we're like getting to a point where like just native web technology
Oh yeah.
I'm from like the school of Zeldman, you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Like, so the more that like we're able to like just build things to standards, it's like that's a bet on the future, because all these frameworks come and go. Every, tech stack CMS comes and goes. So it's like, what is going to stand the test of time? That's the stuff that I get really excited about. It's like it's really, it's less about like theoretical or like, it makes me feel good to be this. I think it is now a matter of pragmatism. I think of it as like the same way as like solar panels used to be. It's like, oh yeah, like you're an environmentalist, and now it's just like literally just crunch the numbers.
Yeah.
Solar panels are a good idea.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Web
seriously.
standards a good idea. So
Nice. I know you're a big music guy. What's one of your favorite albums right now?
oh my gosh.
Give me a few if you want. Doesn't matter.
How much time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say an artist that we really like. We've been listening to a lot of Rubble Bucket. If you're familiar with Rubble Bucket,
Is that the
they're
dog
like,
that has like a little thing on his back? Yeah, he
Dog?
runs around saving the world. Rubble.
no,
You talking about
not-
Wishbone?
not
Paw Patrol. No,
Rubble.
that's not
Oh, Paw Patrol.
Rubble
no,
Bucket.
no.
Okay.
No, Rubble Bucket. Check out Rubble Bucket. They're a great band. It's like Barry sax, sort of like front woman, 2 trumpets, but like it's like good art rock. It's like as close to like Talking Heads as like
Cool.
modern music can get. So they're really great. The other big thing though, if you don't mind me plugging,
Do it.
I'm putting together like this like really big show next year. I'm coming up on my 40th birthday, and I'm like swinging for the fences. So in Pittsburgh, I'm getting like a bunch of musicians, a lot of them web people we all know, Chris Coyer, Dave Rupert, Dan Mall, other people. We're all going to play music, and we're going to fill up this venue in Pittsburgh, this old converted church, which is really, really cool. And we're doing like a big charity show, and we have like a whole year to plan this single show. And I'm like, all in on it. So from a music perspective, we're like, lay on your song requests and stuff like that. But it's like, it's going to be like a party to end all
man,
parties,
that's awesome.
a concert to end all concerts. So
Frostapalooza.
Frostapalooza,
Nice. We'll make sure that's linked up.
August
That's amazing.
17th, 2024.
Oh my God.
Wicked.
But yeah, if you want to hear what my musical tastes are,
Yeah.
that's the best way to do that.
Oh, cool.
Awesome. So last thing we have here is a sick pick and a shameless plug. A sick pick is you pick something that is sick. Literally can be anything. Could be a chocolate bar. Can be a little gadget that you've been using. Could be a outlook on life.
An outlook on life. I'm going with outlook on life. Take outlook on life is you should. You're selling yourself short, and you could do more. Do whatever you want with your life. There's no real constraints to your life besides your own imagination. That is my sick pick.
That's deep.
I love it.
Man,
Yes.
we need to add that question to everybody. Give us your outlook on life. I like that. And shameless plug. What would you like to plug to everybody?
I think I just did. I mean, Shameless, you should come to that, and that's going to be awesome. But if I could do another one, like if we obviously talked about like the gory details of all this like design system stuff, it's hard, it's complicated and stuff. So shameless plug, like if your organization needs help with that, the technical architecture, the design architecture, but also the people process, all that stuff, you could hire us at Big Medium. It's at bigmedium.com. And you could also get to it from my site, bradfrost.com, where I'm like writing about all this stuff. So
Sweet.
Amazing. Brad, we'll have to have you on again, man. This has been incredible.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.
Super amazing.
I love talking with you guys, and yeah, I love talking. Yep.
Sweet. Well, thanks so much for coming on. We'll
Thank
catch you
you.
later.